He didn't say a word when they led him to the altar. He just stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who'd seen too much sun and not enough kindness. Dust clung to the knees of his pants, and his boots were still wet from crossing Dry Creek that morning. His hat was in his hand, hair flattened and damp with sweat, eyes hollow like someone walking to a noose. Across from him, she waited, her hands folded like she was praying, though the preacher hadn't spoken yet. Her dress was gray with time, not fashion. Her face was soft, but it was a kind of tired softness, the kind that knew how to bandage a wound, hush a crying child, or cook for a man too bitter to thank her. She was 43. Folks said it like it was a curse. Aylin was 23. People whispered. One boy snorted. An old woman murmured something about fate and shame, but no one stopped it. The marriage license had ink on it. The preacher had his Bible, and Aylin's hand was already being pushed into hers. Let's go back. 3 days earlier, Aylin had been gut-deep in mud trying to rescue a yearling calf stuck behind a fallen log. Rain had turned the prairie into soup, and that calf didn't want saving. His shirt clung to him, soaked and half-ripped from barbed wire. But he worked until the creature was free, coughing and staggering beside its mother. That's the kind of man Aylin was, quiet, stubborn, and loyal to things that didn't always thank him. His ranch was a good size, nestled between 2 ridges east of Grayson. Folks called it Elkhorn, though no elk had been seen in years. It was his father's land before cholera took half the family in 76. Aylin buried 3 people before he was 15. He stopped talking much after that. The mail arrived on Tuesday. That's when it all started. Sheriff Lohman rode up in the rain, boots clapping against the porch. Aylin met him in the doorway with a tired nod. "You got a cousin named Elias?" the sheriff asked. Aylin squinted. "Maybe. My ma had a brother. Elias took off west, Montana Territory, left behind a mess in Clay Junction. For kids. No wife." Aylin said nothing, just listened. "Town's old midwife's been looking after him, but she's sick now. They need a man, legal guardian, blood, and a roof. Why me? You're the only kin they could find." Aylin looked out over the pasture. Rain peeled off the roof in long ropes. He thought about his horses, the mule with the bad leg, the cellar half full of beans. Then he said something that surprised even himself. "I'll ride out in the morning." Clay Junction wasn't much. A feed store, 2 churches, and too many headstones for a town that size. The orphanage, if you could call it that, was a crumbling house behind the blacksmith's lot. For children stood on the porch like carved wood, watching Aylin as he dismounted. The oldest girl held a rifle with both hands. She couldn't have been more than 12. Inside, the midwife lay in a cot, face sunken, breath shallow. "I can't keep him," she rasped. "Ain't right." Aylin stood near the doorway, hat in hand. "I'm Aylin. Kin to their pa, maybe. They need more than kin. They need a woman's hands. Meals, school, that kind of thing. You got that on your ranch." He didn't answer. She coughed hard, then said through cracked lips, "Widow Lark's got a heart big as Texas and no one to share it with. Been talking in strays for years. Livin' alone since her man passed in 72. Aylin glanced at the children. The boy with the crooked jaw. The girl with the scar near her collarbone. Eyes that had seen too much. "You want them kids to last the winter," the midwife said. "You marry that woman." Aylin shifted his weight. "I ain't lookin' to marry." She smiled, weak and sad. "Nobody is. But sometimes the land picks the seeds." That night, Aylin didn't sleep. He sat near the fire with the oldest girl beside him. Her name was Clara. She didn't talk much, but she watched everything. "She don't smile," Clara said, referring to the woman who brought them supper earlier. "Who?" Aylin asked. "The one you're supposed to marry." He looked into the flames. "She smiled once," Clara added, "when you gave Jack your bread." Aylin remembered. The youngest boy had cried when his roll fell into the mud. Aylin just handed him his own without thinking. "She's not ugly," Clara said. "She's just tired." Aylin didn't reply. Later that night, he stood outside under the stars, hat tilted back, breathing in the quiet. The wind was soft, but it carried something weighty. A shift, a pull. He'd known girls in town, daughters of ranchers, quick to smile and quick to judge. None of them ever looked at him like he was anything but a man with mud on his boots and calluses on his palms. But this was different. This was about survival, about keeping 4 children fed, about winter, and maybe it was about something else, something he couldn't name. The preacher wore black. Widow Lark wore gray. Aylin wore the same shirt he'd rescued the calf in. Clara stood behind him, holding the youngest's hand. No one said, "Congratulations." The only sound was the preacher's slow, steady voice and the rustle of wind across the dry chapel roof. When it was done, Aylin turned to look at her. Not as a stranger, not as a burden, but as a woman who had just stepped into his life and refused to flinch. She met his gaze, chin up. Then someone in the back chuckled. A loud, bitter sound. Aylin turned. A rancher named Boon. Big man. Always too loud. Boy don't even shave regular. And they're saddling him with an old mule, Boon muttered. Aylin didn't speak. He stepped forward, slow and calm, and stared Boon down until the man looked away. Then he reached out, deliberate, and took his new wife's hand again. Not because he had to, because the room needed to see it. Outside, the wind picked up dust and scattered it across the steps. They walked out together into the light. 2 names, 1 paper. No smiles. But the kids followed. And so did something else, a feeling. Like the beginning of a storm or the soft hush before spring. Something had changed. And Clay Junction would never forget it. Not after what Aylin did next. The wind was dry and restless when Aylin brought them home. 5 people rode in the old wagon. 4 children and a woman who now wore his last name. Aylin sat up front with the reins loose in his hands, eyes forward, jaw set like stone. Widow Lark sat beside him, her skirt pressed down by her own callous palms, her wedding band still catching the sun like it didn't quite belong to her yet. The children were silent as the wagon bumped down the trail toward Elkhorn Ranch. Clara watched everything. Jack, the smallest, curled against a sack of potatoes like it was a bed. The 2 middle boys, Thomas and Everett, sat with their arms crossed, shoulders close. They hadn't said a word since the wedding. When the ranch came into view, miles of golden grass rolling toward the distant red hills, the barn squatting tired beside the main house, Clara spoke. "You live alone out here?" Aylin gave a quiet nod. "Not anymore," she said. The house wasn't much. It had been enough for 1 man. Now it would need to hold 6. The table was small. The beds were fewer than needed. There was no proper place for schooling, no dresses for the boys to outgrow, and no back porch for a woman to stand and shell beans the way Widow Lark probably used to do before life turned her quiet. That night, after the children were asleep on makeshift bedding and borrowed quilts, Aylin brought in more firewood. He didn't look at her when he said it. "I'll build the boys a loft. You can take the bedroom with the girl and the little one." She was stirring beans in a pot that didn't need stirring. "You don't have to sleep out there," she said softly. "I know." Silence stretched between them. "I never asked for this," she added. Aylin looked over at her. "Neither did I." Then, without another word, he grabbed his coat and stepped outside into the cool dark. The barn door groaned when he opened it, and the old stallion inside snorted once before settling. Aylin dropped down into hay with a sigh. He didn't mind hard ground. What he minded was the way people had looked at her in town. Like she was something used. Like the very idea of him beside her was shameful. But he'd seen the way she tied Jack's shoes, kneaded dough with her elbows when her wrists ached, the way she'd taken Clara's hand without asking. There was nothing shameful in her, only strength, and that scared men more than beauty. By the end of the week, whispers had started spreading through town. Boon led the charge, of course. "Boy married a woman old enough to be his ma," he'd say in the saloon. "Probably got no fight in him. Probably can't even swing a hammer without asking her first." Others followed. A shopkeeper mentioned how Widow Lark had snagged herself a ranch. The school marm called it a sad charity case. Aylin didn't hear most of it, until Sheriff Lohman rode out one morning and stood quiet by the barn fence. "You made some folks uncomfortable," Lohman said. Aylin kept hammering the new railing on the porch. "You always did things your own way," the sheriff went on. "But this? A boy with a woman who's lived more life than him." Aylin didn't look up. "She's a good cook, keeps the fire warm, knows how to stop children from crying," he said, each sentence flat and deliberate. "And she works harder than any man I've hired. That ain't what people are whisperin'." "I know," the sheriff sighed. "Just watch yourself. Boon's got pride, and pride's dangerous when it's bored." Aylin nodded once. Then he picked up the next nail. A week later, Clara came running from the edge of the fields. Her breath was short, her eyes wide. "There's a man," she gasped, "by the pond. He's drunk." Aylin dropped the bucket he was carrying and ran. He found Boon pissing into the reeds, his horse tied nearby. His face was red, his words thick. "You think this place is yours now?" Boon slurred. "That woman? Those kids? You think you're better than me?" Aylin didn't answer, just stood still, fists loose at his sides. Boon stepped closer. "She didn't want you. She just wanted a roof. You think you've earned any of this?" Aylin's voice was low and even. "Go home, Boon." Boon spat. "She should have married someone her own age. Like me." Before Aylin could reply, a voice behind him cut through the air. "She didn't want you, Boon." It was Clara. She stood with her shoulders back, small and shaking but unafraid. "She told me once, said you looked at her like she was meat. Not a woman. Not a mother." Boon's eyes narrowed. "You best keep your mouth shut, girl." Aylin moved between them. His voice never rose. "You'll leave now." Boone's hand went to his belt, hovering near the pistol. Then he paused. Behind Aylin, Widow Lark had stepped forward. No weapon in her hand. No fear in her face. Just calm. "You pull iron on a child and a mother," she said, "and you'll be remembered for the coward you are." That stopped Boone. He looked around. At the woman, the girl, the man who hadn't flinched. And then he turned. He didn't mount right away, just stumbled toward his horse, muttering. When he was gone, Aylin turned to Clara. Her hands were trembling now. "You did good," he said softly. Clara looked at him, then at Widow Lark. "Are we safe here?" Aylin didn't answer right away. He looked out at the land, the hills rising golden in the late afternoon sun, the windmill creaking faintly in the breeze, the way the barn's shadow stretched across the dirt like a sleeping beast. "Yes," he finally said, "we are." But in his gut, something shifted. Something warned him that Boone wasn't done. That night, the wind didn't settle. It howled across the ridge like it had a message no one wanted to hear, rattling the shutters, pulling at the barn roof, moaning down the chimney like a ghost dragging chains. The children curled tighter under their blankets. Widow Lark sat near the hearth, darning a boy's torn sock with thread so thin it barely held. Aylin stood at the window, his hand resting on the wood frame, eyes fixed on the distant hills. A thin column of smoke rose beyond the tree line, too far to be a campfire, too low to be a brush burn, just high enough to be a signal. Aylin didn't say anything. He stepped out into the yard, coat over his shoulders, and stood still, listening, watching. He'd seen that kind of smoke before, back in '78 when the cattlemen and sheep herders went to blood over a fence line. 2 men dead, a cabin burned to the ground, and that same lazy smoke, curling up like it had all the time in the world. The next morning he found the tracks, boot prints, wagon wheels, 6 or 7 men riding in a wide arc across his grazing land. They hadn't come close to the house yet, but they were watching, feeling him out. Boone. It had to be Boone. But Boone didn't ride alone. He gathered Clara and Widow Lark before breakfast. The boys were out feeding the goats. Jack still slept curled under an old quilt. "You see anything strange?" Aylin said quietly. "You come find me, right away. Don't wait. Don't guess. Don't be brave." Clara nodded, serious. Her fingers clutched her new slingshot like it was a pistol. Widow Lark didn't speak, but she reached out and put her hand on Aylin's wrist. Just for a second. It was the first time she'd touched him that wasn't about chores or handing him a plate. Aylin stared at her hand, then at her eyes. "I've seen men like Boon," she said softly. "Pride don't sleep. It festers." Aylin gave a slow nod. Then he walked out to the barn and started cutting wood. That afternoon, the preacher came riding up. His name was Josiah Briggs. Tall, bald, wore a cross carved from peachwood and a face like a stretched-down scarecrow. He dismounted slow, knees stiff. "Aylin," he said, wiping his brow. "Thought I'd pay a visit." Aylin gave a nod. "Storm comin'?" "Not that kind," the preacher said. "Boon was in church Sunday. Said you'd taken advantage. Claimed you tricked a good woman and her inheritance. Claimed she's not in her right mind." Widow Lark stepped out of the house just then, wiping her hands on her apron. Josiah tipped his hat. "Ma'am." She didn't smile. "I've got more sense than every man in this valley combined, Josiah Briggs. And I didn't marry no man out of confusion." He cleared his throat. "I didn't say you did, but others might listen to Boon. He's talking to the town council. Says he has the law on his side." "What law?" Aylin asked. Josiah looked down. "Widow fraud. Inheritance claims. There's no truth in it, but truth don't always win. He says you can't be a father. Says you're dangerous. Says you married under false pretenses." Aylin didn't blink. "Then he can come say it to my face." Josiah leaned closer. "You've got children in this house now. If Boone stirs up enough fear, they'll come for them. Maybe not through you. Maybe through the church. The town council. A circuit judge. All polite. All legal." Aylin's jaw tightened. The preacher reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather Bible. "Keep your eyes open. And keep your family close." Then he mounted and rode away. That night, Clara stood on the porch with Aylin. "Is Boone gonna take us?" she asked quietly. "No, you sure?" He glanced at her. Her braid was fraying from the wind. She looked older than 12 now. "No one's taking you. Not while I've got a breath left in me." She looked down at her boots. "You never wanted us." He didn't answer. "But you protect us like you did," she added. "I do now." She nodded. Then she said something that cracked the dark quiet in half. "Ma told me a man's not what he wants. He's what he does." Aylin blinked. "Your ma was wise. She married the wrong man," Clara whispered. "But she still said that. Said if a man does right, he is right." Aylin didn't know what to say. Then Widow Lark stepped onto the porch, wrapped in a shawl. "There's something you should see." They followed her inside. On the table was a letter. No return address, ink fresh, envelope torn with a knife. Aylin read it slowly. It was from a lawyer in Junction Creek. A land dispute. Boone's lawyer. He was filing a petition to have the children removed from the ranch. Temporary custody, pending a moral review. "They think this marriage is a cover," Widow Lark said. "Think you're too young to make a decision." Aylin set the letter down. "I'll ride to Junction Creek," he said. "Tomorrow." Clara stepped forward. "I want to come." He shook his head. "Not safe." She looked like she might argue, but Widow Lark touched her shoulder. Clara relented. Aylin walked to the back room, pulled out the old rifle his father had cleaned every Sunday. He checked the barrel, oiled the latch. He slept in the barn again that night. Not because he had to, but because that's where men stood guard when the wolves circled. And the wolves were circling. The next morning was too quiet. No birdsong, no wind, just the sound of wheels on dry dirt as Aylin rode toward Junction Creek. The hills rose slow and gold on either side. The dust behind him lingered like ghosts, but halfway to town he spotted them. 4 riders, waiting near a dry creek bed. One of them tall, wearing Boone's black hat. Aylin stopped the wagon. The men didn't move, just watched. Then Boone raised a hand. A greeting, or a warning. Aylin said nothing. He stared right back. Then, slowly, he reached behind the bench, gripped the rifle and laid it across his lap. Not lifted, not pointed, just visible. A message. If you want this fight, you'll have to earn it. Boon smiled and turned his horse. The others followed. Aelin didn't exhale until they disappeared over the ridge. But the feeling in his gut stayed. This wasn't over. And next time it wouldn't be a warning. The first bullet didn't come from the front. It came from the ridge. Cracked the bark off a pine tree not 10 feet from the barn, splitting the silence of morning wide open. Jack screamed from inside the house. Everett dropped the bucket he'd been carrying and hit the dirt. Clara had her arms around Thomas before he knew what happened. And Widow Lark, she didn't flinch. She grabbed the shotgun from the shelf by the door like she'd done it 100 times. Aelin was already halfway to the barn when the second shot rang out. This one hit the fence post near the corral. The horse bolted. The chickens scattered. Aelin's boots slammed into the dry earth as he dove behind the trough, rolled once, and came up with his rifle cocked. Eyes sharp, breathing slow. He scanned the ridge. Then he saw it. A flash of movement, riders silhouetted against the morning sun. 4 of them. One with a long rifle. One with a white hat. Boon. Aelin didn't fire. Not yet. Not unless they came closer. They didn't. They just stood there. High on the hill, horses restless. Guns quiet now. It was a message. You're not safe. We know where you sleep. Aelin lowered his rifle slowly and backed toward the barn. Inside the house, the children were gathered near the hearth, wide-eyed, pale. Widow Lark stood guard near the window, barrel leveled, steady hands. They ain't brave enough to come down yet, she said. But they're making sure we know they could. Aelin nodded. We need to talk. They gathered around the table. No food, no small talk. Just tension so thick it could have been nailed to the walls. They're trying to push us out, Aelin said. Legally with letters. And now this. What do we do? Clara asked. Aelin looked to Widow Lark. You know him better than I do. She folded her arms. Boon never wins fair. He rattles cages. Waits for fear to do the rest. He won't stop. No. Not unless something stops him. Aelin thought for a long while. Then he said the one thing he hadn't wanted to say since this all started. We leave. The children froze. Widow Lark stared. Just for now, he added. Take the wagon, head west. There's a place near San Gabriel I know. Friend of my father's. You can wait there while I handle this. You're not coming? Thomas asked. I'll follow. Once I've shut this down. No, Clara said. We're not splitting up. Aelin gave her a firm look. If anything happens to you, this ain't worth it. She stood from her chair. You think we've been safe before this? You think that's new? Boon is just another name. Before him it was men with knives. Before that it was the cold. She looked over at Widow Lark, then at her brothers. We stay. We fight. The room was quiet. Then Widow Lark spoke. If we run now, we teach them they can drive us off our own land. Aelin, this is your home. It's ours now, Clara said. Aelin looked at the rifle leaning in the corner. Then he nodded. All right. They spent the day preparing. Clara dug a trench behind the barn. Thomas collected stones for a signal fire. Aelin reinforced the windows. Widow Lark sharpened the hatchet, made 3 batches of hardtack, and salted every piece of meat they had. By dusk they had a plan. Not a good one, but it was something. Aelin rode into town at first light, alone. He tied his horse in front of the courthouse and walked through the door like a man going to a duel. Boon was there. So was the circuit judge. So were 6 men with vested interests in land, cattle, and fear. Aelin stepped to the front, unarmed but not weak. You tried the law. You tried fear. You even tried sending bullets. The judge frowned. Mr. Aelin, there's a process. I've followed every one of them, he cut in. Filed every paper. Married proper. Took in bloodkin like the law asked. Boon scoffed from the back. You call that a marriage? Boy, that's a trade. You think she picked you? 'Cause she wanted you? Aelin turned slowly. You ever wonder why she didn't pick you, Boon? That shut the man up. Aelin turned back to the room. His voice lowered. There are children on that ranch now. A woman with more dignity in her silence than you got in your whole damn bloodline. And they are not your property. Not your pawns. Not your target. The judge raised a hand. That's enough. If you're accusing Mr. Boon of violence, you'll need proof. Alan reached into his coat and pulled out a bullet casing. Set it on the table. That's from my front yard. He turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. One more thing. Everyone looked up. If anything happens to that ranch, if one shutter breaks, if one goat goes missing, there won't be lawyers next time. He didn't smile, didn't threaten, just left. 3 nights later, the drums started. Not Comanche, not Apache. Men with whiskey and too much pride. Banging on pans, slapping saddlebags, whooping into the darkness from just beyond the lantern light. Alan lit the lantern by the gate. Widow Lark stood at his side, the children behind her. I see too, she whispered. There's more. Just past the ridge. Clara held Jack close, her hands tight on his shoulders. Then came the words. A voice from the dark. Boons. Send her out, boy. She's wasted on you. Another voice. You want to play family? Then come out and protect him. Alan raised the lantern high. The light stretched out just far enough to see 4 horses, Boon in the center. Then Alan said, loud and clear, you want to end this? Step forward. Silence. The horses shifted. Saddles creaked. But no one moved. Then Clara stepped forward. Past Alan. Past Widow Lark. She walked right to the edge of the light and shouted, you ain't men. You're ghosts. You're not fighting a boy. You're fighting a family. Her voice cracked on that last word. But she stood tall. And the hills went quiet. No reply. No gunshot. Just wind. Then slowly, one by one, the horses turned. Boon stared longest. But even he turned. The sound of hoofbeats faded. And the wind finally settled.